Well, Mr. President is not getting a birthday card this year, that's for sure. What's going on, guys? I'm Tyler, and I'm here to let you know that Blonde is no perfect movie, but whether you like the movie or not, you could probably already agree with that sentiment. So, Blonde is based off of the novel of the same name, novel, that tells the semi fictional life story of Norma Jean Baker, aka Marilyn Monroe, played by Ana de Armas, and how her traumatic upbringing impacted her life and career as an adult. And that's my best way of summing up the plot because while this biopic does cover a lot of similar beats that you get about other movies revolving around actors and musicians, like broken relationships or drug addiction, the presentation and story structure within this film tells the story in such a fascinating way that the smallest little key events in the plot feel as if they're spoilers, even though they technically aren't. And full disclosure, going into this movie, I didn't know shit about Marilyn Monroe. I have never seen a movie of hers to this day. I really didn't know that many facts about her. The most I knew, like everybody else, was that iconic shot from 7 Year Itch. But when I read that Andrew Dominik, who is definitely one of the more experimental and artsy directors that doesn't really get that much attention, was going to make a 3 hour NC-17 telling of her life story, and that the theater that Josh works at was going to screen it for 1 week only before it hit Netflix, I figured that this would probably be a movie worth seeing on the big screen for a longer period of time than it got. And that is absolutely the case. Blonde is one of the best movies I've seen all year, and it definitely gave me the most memorable experience. Sometimes when you read a review, a movie will talk, it will say that a movie was hypnotic. This movie put me in a fucking trance where for the majority of the runtime, my eyes were glued to the screen. I felt like I was in a different world. I felt like I had a huge headache and whiplash from my neck watching what was going on. I felt like I was in the scene with Marilyn the entire time. And when the movie was over, I just had to walk off and get a huge glass of water just to refresh myself from just how surreal and trippy of a movie this was. That's right. A movie about Marilyn Monroe is surreal and trippy, as opposed to most biopics where the personal events of the artist are told in such a bland way where you really don't give a shit what's going on unless there is domestic violence or drug abuse. And then the performances are the stylish, most invigorating part of the film. Andrew Dominik designs every frame of this movie to visually tell the story and make you experience the exact same emotions that Monroe is experiencing at a given time. And while there are definitely sequences that feature a lot of hallucinations, lots of unsettling imagery, very eerie sound design that come across more as a horror movie where the more Marilyn starts to unravel, you start to imagine whenever she walks past the set of stage lights, you hear the zings as she walks past and then it fades in the background, or the music completely mutes out whenever she sees or hears something that she desperately tries to avoid, or when she's completely hounded by photographers, when the light bulb goes off and then hits the ground, it sounds like a gunshot and the bullet is hitting after it has been discharged. And some incredibly cool camera work. There are a lot of shots in this movie that are Darren Aronofsky style body cam, where the frame moves along with the actor, that achieves such a dizzying effect, especially during these nightmare sequences, especially one where Monroe runs from a hospital and supposedly into her childhood home in one take. And the payoff was just insane. Just the smallest details within this film can make a huge difference. I've lost track of how many times camera movement can make you experience an emotion throughout this film. There are so many conversations and monologues that play without music to lend to the atmosphere, but just the camera dollying in so slowly on an actor delivering their lines can make their dialogue feel all the more impactful. But arguably the biggest surprise in this movie that I wasn't expecting was how the movie shifts from black and white to color in a way that I have wanted to see in a movie for the longest time. Have you ever imagined to yourself that black and white could be used to portray negative emotions, and then within the exact same scene, it gets switched to color to show the happiness, the optimism in a character? It actually starts off that way. At the beginning, you get a piece of Norma Jean's childhood that's told in color, and is supposedly a much happier time in her life before things truly went to shit. And then it'll switch to black and white, where, through circumstances I don't want to spoil, she's separated from her mother. And initially, that's what you think the switch from black and white to color is going to be. And I just sat there and I went, yes, I have wanted a movie so bad to do something like this before. I haven't seen a movie from any country, any culture, any region that has done something like this before, and it gives me much more hope that we could see more stuff like that in the future. If I were to make a movie, I would definitely feature at least one film where we achieve that cinematic technique, because it's such a missed opportunity. But completely out of nowhere, that technique actually switches the rules and goes the other way around, where the black and white cinematography looks more simplistic, but it feels more romanticized to show the happier moments in Monroe's life, where she finds someone that truly appreciates her for who she is, or she's given a golden career opportunity. And then the colorized sequences will feel deceptively gorgeous, but are all the more tragic because you're actually seeing true colors. And these rules switch back and forth so much. I'm usually pretty good at analyzing this kind of stuff, but because it's so jarring, for the life of me, I can't figure out what it's supposed to mean. But for once, I do not give a shit whatsoever, because Andrew Dominik creates such an unpredictable, one-of-a-kind atmosphere that is so emotionally engaging to sift through. And it's never just for show. It is used to tell the story within each individual scene. The black and white cinematography is super gorgeous, where characters are just shrouded in shadows and silhouettes to make them feel moody and unpredictable, or to portray isolation, where sometimes Monroe would be the only lit character in a pitch black room. And the color sequences, just like Pearl, feel like Technicolor. They are super bright, vibrant, and super saturated, where the colors leap off the screen and remind you of that 50s old Hollywood style that, again, I would love to see in modern movies nowadays, that we just don't get enough anymore unless it's from an auteur director. It's just, the amount of filmmaking and craft within this film is utterly impeccable, and I would love to see Andrew Dominik get nominated for Best Director, or the cinematographer get nominated for Best Cinematography. I feel like, despite the movie's rating, it would definitely achieve that kind of effect. And so many scenes throughout this film that rely on dialogue are told without music to lend towards that atmosphere, but when it's supposed to be visually told and the emotions and stakes are super high, we get a musical score from Nick Cave and Warren Ellis, because Dominik has directed a couple Nick Cave concert documentaries. It's a symphonic musical score that doesn't really feel reminiscent of the time period, but it gives this psychedelic sense that everything feels a hell of a lot more intense, especially during this one sex scene that I'll get into later, because given the amount of publicity, or lack thereof, in regards to this movie, the one thing people are talking about is that this is rated NC-17 for its sexual content, and naturally people are going to be hesitant going into this. There are some people that have already seen it and have complained that it's too disturbing, or is supposedly exploitive of Monroe's legacy. For me personally, I've seen more full frontal nudity and more depraved sexual acts of violence in Game of Thrones than a movie like this. So I personally don't think that it should floor that many people, but I do acknowledge that this is an uncomfortable movie to sift through, and my tolerance for dark content is different than most. I have no problem admitting that. So if you do watch this movie on Netflix, just remind yourself there's some stuff that's going to make you feel uneasy and you're going to want to fast forward through it. But the claim that it exploits Monroe, I have to disagree strongly on, for one specific reason. 90 to 95% of this movie is really just telling Marilyn Monroe's personal life, with her acting career getting the shortest and smallest amount of screen time. In fact, there are so many scenes where you honestly forget that she is that public of a figure, because we spend so much more time in this intimate personal relationship, or lack thereof, in regards to her character. So as opposed to viewing her as Marilyn Monroe, the actress icon and sex symbol, like all of the casting directors, the makeup artists, the photographers that are at every premiere, the crowds that are trying to burst through the police crowds to say how much they love her, or how much they are disgusted by her because they think she's so depraved. We actually it actually feels watching this movie like we're actually spying on a young woman who is going through a lot already. One constant feeling that I had throughout this film was that Marilyn Monroe was definitely attractive to look at, but I also felt dirty for looking at her that way at the exact same time. There's maybe like one sex scene that I mentioned before involving her in a threesome that was arguably the only sexy scene in the film because she's making love to the only two people that she's met at that point who really view her as a human being and are as passionate in making love towards her as she is to them. The visuals and the score, wow, this was the scene that really put me in a trance that just never stopped. I haven't seen a scene like this since Neon Demon, where it just felt like I was entranced and enticed by all of that beauty. But you were allowed to look at her that way. The movie acknowledges that there are times to look at people in sexual intimacy, but if you actually view them as a person, not as an object. Especially during the 7 Year Itch recreation, where the crew members are whistling and cheering her on, and we get all these slow motion close ups where the dress is flying everywhere and her panties are in clear view. But her husband at the time is just staring at her in disgust, and you're not really sure if he's disgusted that she's flaunting herself in front of strangers, that she's doing this gig for money, that these men do not view her the way that he does, or if he's becoming jealous of all the attention that she's receiving. So it the movie does explore the complexity of how to view women sexually, and the nicest thing I can say, outside of that one threesome scene, none of the sex scenes are meant to feel sexy. If anything, they're meant to make you feel dirty for having looked in the first place, especially when Mr. President shows up. And while I will admit, I do feel uncomfortable with the way they portray him in such a negative manner. If you were to tell me that this stuff truly happened, I'd have no problem believing that. But since we don't know for a fact whether or not this is true, that it's merely speculation, I do have a problem with the movie taking it like verbatim, like it was a real event. And it also makes you question how much of the movie really is true or false. Again, the black and white and color could differentiate without you knowing, but yeah, this was that presidential scene did have my jaw on the floor. It was that big of a surprise. But thankfully, the biggest surprise of this movie was Ana de Armas. She gave a career best performance in what is hands down the best acting I have seen all year. She was incredible and incredibly brave too, because nudity aside, this role asks a lot of her. She has the difficult task of having to portray a real life icon that very few people today really know about, and portray her as such a flawed human being who makes several destructive mistakes that affect her, her personal life, her career, the very few people she has left in her life that truly care for her and don't understand where this behavior is coming from, while also portraying her as sympathetic and identifiable without ever going too over the top. And she pulls that off in spades. She absolutely nailed the glitzy accent and soft-spoken line delivery that made everybody fall in love with her and consider her so seductive back in the day. But in this movie, it makes her come across as a much more innocent, naive, and shy person. And when we do see that traumatic childhood during the first 10 to 20 minutes of the movie, and I gotta say, Lily Fisher as young Norma Jean, I have no idea how they filmed these scenes without completely traumatizing her, or at least I hope they didn't traumatize her, because she was a damn good actress for someone her age, and I can't imagine any kid in real life that I know that would put up with something like that just to be in a movie. So props to her, and I really hope you get further work in the future. But when we do see her childhood, it makes sense where this self-destructive need for attention comes from. She's not looking for attention from anyone or anything, although as a movie star and a model, she definitely gets a little bit of that. But her main desire is to find someone who loves her the way she is. And without spoiling anything with that person, she wants to give love towards someone that she never really had growing up and feels that she could do a hell of a lot better. And you wish that that desire didn't come with so many obstacles that interfere with her life and her career. What people have been saying lately the past few years about how actors tend to be people who, even when they're good people, are striving for approval from others. And when they go to Hollywood, a place where you get rejected so frequently, and when you do make it, because the majority of people don't, it's because you say or do things that other people want you to say or do. That's her career in a nutshell. Her first big audition was the scene that hooked me into her performance, where she's acting out a scene that is eerily similar to something that happened in her childhood. And again, as the camera dollies in, the dialogue gets so much emotional weight, but then she starts crying, and those tears in her eyes just amplify the fact that her performance is coming from somewhere much closer to home. But then the casting directors just see her as an actress with blonde hair and a nice piece of ass. And that's not even how she gets her foot in the door. The movie is all unapologetically disgusting in how it portrays the fact that the industry itself, not strictly the people in there, because there are people who are genuinely decent and are just trying to make a living, but the industry itself didn't give a shit then, let's face it, despite everything that's happened lately, still doesn't give a shit now, about the actors who are so submissive so long as they can get one day in the spotlight where the entire world adores them. Hell, Norma Jean's makeup artist only comforts her when she needs to be at this one gig and she has to look dynamite, and she goes along with it. And that's the complicated thing about this movie. For every wrong that Hollywood has done towards her, there are moments where she could have stood up to the studio. In fact, there's one moment where she does refuse a movie role on the basis that she requires more pay and is considered a much more prominent part of the movie, and it supposedly pays off. So you know that she's capable of being brave and independent. You know for a fact that she wants to spill the beans on every atrocity that has happened towards her, towards all of the businessmen, the agents, and the directors, and hoping that her boyfriends or husbands could see what went wrong, so that they could understand where the booze and pills are coming from, and they could have potentially helped her and got her out of this mess. But the reason she stays quiet is because these memories are so heartbreaking that it's hard to say them out loud. She assumes that some men just don't care enough to help her, or wouldn't even believe that these things happen to her, because she's a dynamite movie star. She has the entire world at her fingertips, supposedly. So you understand why she stays quiet, but you also acknowledge that staying quiet did a lot more harm than good and ended up making her more lonely to begin with, because everyone in her life that does want to help her eventually loses patience because she doesn't even want to talk about it. And it's a real shame, because while there are definitely a lot of men in this movie that exacerbate the problem, there are a few boyfriends and husbands that you do like, and you wish that she made the most out of their relationships. Xavier Samuels especially gave the most objectively seductive performance, where he's so charismatic and enticing. I forgot who I was supposed to be. Well, I'm not even sure. I've never seen a performance that left me so confused how I was supposed to feel about him, even though it's crystal clear what you're supposed to feel about him. He's the one man that Marilyn can connect to the most, because they both come from a place where they wish their childhoods had turned out better, that their parents were more loving instead of seeing them as a fragment of the parents that left and abandoned them. But of course, no one can understand their struggles except each other, because since they're movie stars, they supposedly have no struggles to begin with. Bobby Cannavale starts off more charismatic than ever as Joe DiMaggio, and when he asks the questions that we want Marilyn to desperately answer, it gives this initial presence of what kind of person he is. But as I said before, with 7 Year Itch, you don't really understand whether or not he's jealous of her or whether he really does feel like she's selling out. Either way, you don't like what happens next, that's for sure. And Adrien Brody as Arthur Miller, the one person in her life that is actively trying to help her out, I haven't seen him give such a nuanced and subdued performance in a long time. There's this great scene where she's auditioning for a play, and he, of course, sees her as the bombshell and just goes, yeah, right, not her. But when she analyzes what she loves about the character she's auditioning, and he asks, how do you know that? And the answer she gives is so mind-blowing towards him. I don't even know how to describe it. It's just such a great performance. In most biopics where the side characters are really only in it for 5 and 10 minutes, so you don't really give a shit what happens towards them, Dominik gets great actors who give performances that, even with the shortest amount of screen time, feels as if you're presented with a three-dimensional character. With Arthur Miller especially, you understand what it is that he sees in her that makes him fall in love with her. He does see the untapped potential, the intelligence, the bravery and independence, and very, very humbled compassion that she has towards people. And that was what made his relationship with her one of the most invigorating. I fucking love this movie. The one problem I really have with Blonde is that the first 20 minutes featuring her childhood, even though it is intense and you understand where the trauma comes from, it feels very streamlined compared to the events that happen throughout the rest of the movie, that you don't really feel the emotional connection until Ana de Armas does pop up on screen. And the last half hour, while it was still good and definitely held my interest, it's incredibly repetitive in how many times you can see Marilyn just drink herself to death and have people walk out on her so much. And I felt like one or two scenes would have been enough, but it felt like five. And while the imagery was definitely suspenseful and had that psychological drama feel that you just don't get as often anymore, it was still interesting to watch. It just wasn't as enticing as the rest of the film. But in any case, Blonde was a blonde bombshell of a movie. Ana de Armas deserves Oscar recognition. I have no idea if she will get it given the circumstances of this movie, but just like Mia Goth and Pearl, she absolutely deserves it. Cannavale, Samuels, Brody make the most of the short amount of screen time and elevate it up to 11, as does Andrew Dominik. The cinematography, the direction, the musical score, the switch between black and white and color, it's just such a visceral cinematic experience that I really wish this played at TIFF. But because this does not fit TIFF's ideal view of the world, which is unfortunate because it's the 50s. It's not meant to represent your worldview. Fucking get over it. It's just such an impactful film for me. I understand anyone who says that this is a one-time viewing, even if they love it as much as I do, but I don't know. Once this hits Netflix, I'm definitely gonna give some time to myself and rewatch it because it was just so damn great. I'm gonna give Blonde a 4.5 out of 5. If you can see it in a theater and you think that you can handle it, definitely go for it. Because it'll be worth it in my opinion. Guys, thank you so much as always for watching. If you have seen Blonde, let me know in the comments below what you thought of it. Be sure to stay tuned for more reviews, and be sure to like and subscribe. Take care.